My name is Ibrahim Traore, and I have spent most of my adult life learning how close death can stand beside a man without him seeing it. Since the day I took power in Burkina Faso, I have survived betrayal, armed attacks, hidden enemies, and whispers of assassination carried through dark corridors by men pretending to be loyal. So I became used to danger. I became used to sleeping lightly and waking at the smallest sound. In my world, fear is always nearby. But nothing prepared me for the night of October 17th, 2025. That evening began like many others inside the presidential residence in Ouagadougou. Reports from military commanders covered my desk. News of unrest from the north weighed heavily on my mind. Outside the palace walls, the city slept beneath dry winds and distant thunder. Everything appeared normal. Then, at exactly 11:47 that night, 3 strangers dressed in white arrived at the northern gate carrying black wooden boxes. They claimed the boxes were gifts. Not gifts for a president, gifts for the chosen one. Their voices were calm, almost lifeless. When my security chief Malik Sanogo demanded to inspect the boxes, the men refused. One of them stared directly at the cameras above the gate and said words that still echo inside me even now. If you reject these gifts, the curse will begin before dawn. At first, I believed it was another political threat. I was wrong. That night, something entered the presidential palace that could not be explained by politics, war, or human ambition alone. Strange sounds filled the dark hallways, the air turned cold, lights trembled without reason. A chapel bell rang by itself at midnight. And before the night ended, I would begin to understand that God was warning me about a darkness hiding behind the face of generosity. At 11:47 that night, the northern gate of the presidential palace became the center of something I still struggled to explain with ordinary words. I remember the exact time because Malik Sanogo repeated it several times later while giving his security report. Malik was not a man easily shaken. He had protected military officers during firefights near the Mali border. He had seen bodies torn apart by explosives. He trusted facts more than fear, yet even he looked disturbed when he entered my office that night. Before Malik arrived, I had been alone reviewing intelligence documents beneath the dim yellow light of my desk lamp. Most of the palace was quiet. A few guards moved through the outer halls while distant generators hummed outside. The city of Ouagadougou slept beneath a sky covered by heavy clouds. Then my office phone rang. The sound cut through the silence sharply. I answered immediately. "Mr. President," Malik said quietly, "there are visitors at the northern gate." I frowned. "At this hour?" "Yes." "Who are they?" There was a pause before he answered. "They refused to identify themselves." I leaned back slowly in my chair. That alone was unusual. Nobody arrived at the presidential palace near midnight without authorization. Even diplomats informed us hours ahead of time, yet these strangers had appeared without warning. "How many?" I asked. "3 men. And what do they want?" Another pause followed. "They brought gifts for you." The word gifts unsettled me immediately. Not because gifts were rare in politics, but because of the way Malik pronounced the word. His voice sounded tense, almost cautious, as if he himself did not believe what he was saying. I stood and walked toward the window overlooking part of the courtyard below. Wind pushed dust against the glass. "Search them," I ordered. We tried. Treed. They refused. I turned away from the window. "No one refuses security inspection here." "I know, sir." "Then remove them." Again Malik hesitated. "That may not be wise." The answer irritated me. "Explain." He lowered his voice further. "One of them said if we reject the gifts, a curse will begin before dawn." For several seconds I said nothing. I had heard threats before. Terrorist groups often use religious language to frighten people. Political enemies spread rumors to weaken morale. But something about Malik's tone made this different. Not fear. Confusion. As though he himself could not understand what he had witnessed. "I'm coming down," I finally said. The northern section of the palace always felt colder than the rest of the compound at night. As I walked through the long corridor with 2 armed guards behind me, I noticed the lights flickering faintly overhead. At first I blamed unstable electricity, but then the temperature changed. Cold air moved through the hallway suddenly, unnatural and sharp against my skin. I stopped walking for a moment. One of the guards looked at me nervously. "Did you feel that, sir?" Before I answered, the lights flickered again. Far ahead, near the entrance hall, several security officers stood gathered around the inner checkpoint. Nobody spoke loudly. Their faces were tense. Malik stepped toward me as I approached. He was a tall man with calm eyes, but sweat covered his forehead despite the cold. "They're outside the gate?" I asked. "Yes." "You still haven't searched them?" "They won't surrender the boxes." "What kind of boxes?" Black wood, no markings except one symbol carved underneath. I looked toward the security monitors hanging along the wall. 3 figures dressed entirely in white stood motionless outside the gate beneath dim floodlights. Each carried a dark wooden box held carefully in both hands. What disturbed me most was not their appearance. It was their stillness. They barely moved. Even from the cameras, they seemed unnatural, like statues standing in human form. How long have they been there? I asked. Almost 20 minutes. And they haven't left? No. I stared at the screen closely. Their clothing looked simple but unusually clean despite the dust outside. Their faces appeared pale beneath the lights. I could not determine their age. Then one of them slowly lifted his head and looked directly into the camera. At that exact moment, static crossed every monitor. The screens trembled violently for 2 seconds. Several guards stepped backward instinctively. Then the image returned. The stranger was still staring forward. A silence filled the room that no one wanted to break. Finally, I said, "Open audio." One technician activated the external microphone. For several seconds, only wind could be heard. Then one of the strangers spoke. His voice sounded distant, almost hollow. "We have brought gifts for the chosen leader." Malik answered through the security speaker. "State your identities. We carry no names tonight. You will submit the boxes for inspection. That is forbidden." "You are at the presidential residence," Malik warned. "Nothing enters without inspection." Another silence followed. Then the same voice answered calmly. "If the gifts are rejected, suffering will begin before dawn." A younger guard beside me muttered a prayer beneath his breath. I kept my eyes fixed on the monitor. "Who sent you?" I asked through the speaker. No answer came immediately. Instead, all 3 men lowered their heads together almost perfectly, as if following silent instructions. Then the central figure spoke again. "The warning comes from those who watch nations rise and fall." I felt irritation rising inside me. Enough of this theater. I turned toward Malik. "Detain them." Before he could answer, the lights inside the security room suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Several guards reached instantly for weapons. Someone cursed loudly nearby. For perhaps 3 seconds, the room remained complete. Then emergency lights activated. A deep red glow filled the corridor. At that exact moment, a sound echoed through the palace grounds. A church bell. Slow, heavy, ancien. Every person inside the room froze. The small chapel behind the presidential residence had not been used that evening. No priest was scheduled there. Yet the bell continued ringing through the darkness. 1, 2, 3 times. The sound rolled across the compound like a warning carried through fog. Malik looked toward me. That chapel bell should not be ringing. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Not fear yet, but unease. A deep instinct telling me that the night had changed. Then one of the technicians gasped softly. I turned back toward the monitor screens. The 3 strangers were gone. The gate stood empty beneath the lights. No movement. No vehicles. Nothing. They couldn't have disappeared that fast, one guard whispered. Malik immediately ordered search teams outside. Within minutes, soldiers swept the northern perimeter with flashlights and rifles. They searched nearby roads, walls, and gardens. No footprints were found. No vehicle tracks. No trace of the men in white. But the gates had never opened. That fact troubled everyone. The strangers had stood outside moments earlier. Then they vanished. As the chapel bell echoed again through the cold night air, I realized something important. This was no longer a simple security threat. Something far darker had begun moving around us. And before dawn arrived, every person inside that palace would feel its presence. The sound of the chapel bell followed me long after the strangers vanished from the gate. Inside the presidential palace, silence spread like smoke through every hallway. Guards who normally joked with one another now spoke in whispers. Even the older officers, men hardened by war and years of political violence, avoided meeting each other's eyes. I returned to my office, but concentration had already abandoned me. The bell rang again. Slow, heavy, unnatural. The small chapel behind the palace had stood there long before I became president. It was simple and old, built by missionaries decades earlier. Most nights it remained empty after evening prayer. Nobody stayed there past 10 o'clock. Yet now, shortly after midnight, the bell continued echoing through the darkness. I stood near the window listening carefully. Another ring followed, then another. The sound did not resemble celebration. It resembled warning. Malik entered my office moments later carrying a flashlight despite the electricity having returned. "We searched the northern grounds," he said quietly. "Nothing. No cameras caught them leaving?" "No. That's impossible." "I know. The bell rang again. Malik glanced toward the window uneasily. I already sent 2 men to the chapel. What did they find? They haven't reported back yet. I walked slowly toward my desk and looked down at scattered military reports that no longer mattered to me. My mind remained fixed on the strangers and their black wooden boxes. Gifts for the chosen one. The phrase disturbed me deeply. Not because I believed their words immediately, but because power attracts strange people. Since taking office, I had seen men hide greed behind religion and violence behind patriotism. I learned that evil rarely announces itself openly. It often arrives wearing beautiful clothes and speaking softly. A knock interrupted my thoughts. One of the younger guards stepped inside nervously. "Sir," he said, "Father Emmanuel is here. Bring him in." Father Emmanuel entered carrying a small wooden cross in one hand. He was an elderly priest with tired eyes and gentle manners. He had served the palace chapel for many years and rarely showed emotion. But that night, his face looked pale. "You heard the bell?" I asked. "Yes." "Who rang it?" "No one." Malik frowned immediately. "That's not possible." Father Emmanuel crossed himself slowly. "I checked the chapel myself," he said. "The doors were locked from the inside exactly as I left them earlier tonight." The room became silent again. I studied the priest carefully. "You're certain?" "Yes." "The bell rope?" "Still tied." Malik shook his head. "There has to be an explanation." Father Emmanuel looked toward him calmly. "Not every explanation comforts us." The bell rang once more outside. The sound seemed louder now, closer somehow. I felt cold air move faintly through the office even though the windows remained closed. Then Father Emmanuel spoke again. "When I entered the chapel, I found something strange." "What?" "The candles near the altar had melted." "So?" "I extinguished them hours earlier." A chill moved through me. The priest continued softly, "And one Bible had fallen open beside the altar." "To what passage?" He looked directly at me before answering. "Matthew chapter 26. I knew the verse immediately, even before he spoke it aloud. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation." The words settled heavily inside the room. I turned away for a moment and stared through the dark glass window toward the distant outline of the chapel beyond the courtyard trees. Watch and pray. Since becoming president, I had spent years watching enemies in human form, political rivals, armed extremists, foreign interests hungry for influence, men willing to sell their country for power. But that night I began wondering if danger sometimes moves beyond what soldiers can fight with rifles. Another gust of cold air crossed the room, this time stronger. One of the papers on my desk slid slightly across the surface. Daniel, the youngest guard stationed near the door, shifted nervously. "Sir," he whispered, "the temperature keeps dropping." He was right. The room had become unusually cold. Malik checked the wall thermostat. It says the heating system is still active. Yet every breath now felt sharp against my lungs. Father Emmanuel lowered his voice carefully. "Some warnings come quietly before destruction arrives." I looked toward him. "You believe this is spiritual?" "I believe evil often tests pride first." His answer lingered in my thoughts. Outside, the wind rose louder against the palace walls. Somewhere deep in the building, metal creaked softly like distant footsteps. Then suddenly all the lights flickered again. Daniel inhaled sharply. For a brief second, darkness swallowed the office. When the lights returned, Father Emmanuel was staring toward the far corner of the room. I followed his gaze. Nothing stood there, but the priest's expression troubled me. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Perhaps nothing." "Tell me." I thought I saw movement. Malik immediately reached for his weapon and searched the corner with his flashlight. The area was empty. Still, unease continued spreading through the room like invisible smoke. I sat slowly behind my desk and rubbed my eyes. Exhaustion pressed heavily against me, but instinct warned me not to sleep. Something was wrong inside the palace. Deeply wrong. Then the bell stopped. Abruptly. The sudden silence felt even worse. For several moments no one spoke. Finally, Father Emmanuel stepped closer to my desk. "Mr. President," he said softly, "I strongly advise you not to accept whatever those men brought here tonight." I looked up at him. "You think the boxes matter?" "I think temptation often arrives disguised as opportunity." Malik crossed his arms impatiently. "With respect, Father, we still don't know if the boxes even exist. The men disappeared before entering." The priest turned toward him calmly. "Then why does the palace already feel different?" Nobody answered. "Because every person in that office felt it." The air itself seemed heavier, as though something unseen had crossed the gates before the strangers vanished. I leaned back slowly and closed my eyes for a brief moment. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Gunfire during the coup. Friends carried bleeding through dust-covered streets. The faces of men who betrayed one another for survival. I had witnessed cruelty many times, but never this feeling. Never the sense that darkness could move without footsteps. Father Emmanuel finally spoke again. Sometimes God warns us before evil reveals itself fully. His words stayed with me. And somewhere deep inside, beneath military discipline and political instinct, I began to fear that the warning had already begun. After the chapel bell finally stopped ringing, the palace did not return to normal. If anything, the silence became more disturbing. The air inside my office remained painfully cold despite the heating system still running. Father Emmanuel stood near the bookshelf whispering prayers beneath his breath while Malik continued speaking through his radio with security teams outside. Nobody could find the three strangers. No cameras captured them leaving. No guard saw them escape. It was as though they had dissolved into the darkness itself. Then another call came through Malik's radio. His expression changed immediately. "What is it?" I asked. "The boxes." My chest tightened slightly. "What about them?" "One of the patrol units found them." "Where?" "Inside the eastern corridor." I stood up instantly. "That's impossible." The eastern corridor lay well beyond the security gates. No outsider could have entered unnoticed. Yet according to the guards, the black wooden boxes now sat inside the palace itself. Malik looked deeply unsettled. "The patrol team swears the hallway was empty 10 minutes earlier." Father Emmanuel closed his eyes slowly. I grabbed my coat without another word. The eastern corridor was dimly lit when we arrived. 4 armed guards stood frozen near the entrance, staring toward the center of the hallway. The boxes rested there silently on the polished floor. 3 black wooden boxes, exactly as seen on the security cameras. No footprints surrounded them. No signs of forced entry appeared anywhere nearby. The younger guards looked frightened. One of them crossed himself repeatedly. Another refused to move closer. I walked forward slowly while Malik remained beside me. Up close, the boxes appeared old and strangely worn despite their solid construction. Dark carvings covered parts of the wood, though many symbols looked faded with age. Then I noticed something else. There were no locks, no handles, no visible openings except thin seams running along the edges. "Did anyone touch them?" I asked. "No, sir," Malik answered. "We waited for you." I crouched slightly near the nearest box. The cold around it felt unnatural. Not ordinary cold. A deep freezing sensation that crawled against my skin even without direct contact. Daniel, the young guard from earlier, spoke nervously behind me. "Sir, listen." Everyone became still. At first I heard nothing. Then faintly, from somewhere inside one of the boxes, came a soft scratching sound. Very slow, very deliberate. The hallway instantly erupted with tension. Several guards raised their rifles. Father Emmanuel whispered another prayer. Malik stepped protectively closer to me. "Move back," he ordered the others. The scratching stopped. Silence returned again. But now every person present looked pale. I stared at the boxes for several seconds before speaking. "Take them to my office." Daniel looked shocked. "Sit. We need to examine them carefully." "With respect," Malik interrupted. "We should move them outside the compound immediately." "No," I answered. "Not until we understand what this is." Father Emmanuel looked toward me gravely. "Some doors should never be opened." I met his eyes calmly. "If someone is trying to frighten us, I want answers tonight." Nobody argued further. 2 bomb disposal officers were called to assist. Even they appeared uncomfortable lifting the boxes. One man later admitted the wood felt strangely warm beneath certain parts, while other areas remained freezing cold. As we walked back through the corridors, something else disturbed me. The palace had become unnaturally quiet. No distant conversation. No footsteps from staff. No ordinary movement. Only the sound of the boxes shifting slightly as they were carried toward my office. When we finally entered the room, Father Emmanuel immediately stopped walking. His eyes fixed upon the large wooden cross hanging behind my desk. "What is it?" I asked. Before he answered, the lights flickered violently again. Then it happened. The cross tore free from the wall. It crashed onto the floor with explosive force. Daniel shouted in shock. One of the guards nearly dropped his weapon. The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot. For several seconds, nobody moved. I stared at the fallen cross in disbelief. That cross had hung there securely for years. I personally remembered checking its placement months earlier during renovations. Yet now it lay broken across the floor beside the black boxes. Daniel's voice trembled. "Sir, this is not normal." No one disagreed with him. The room suddenly became even colder. I could see faint vapor forming with each breath. Malik immediately inspected the wall. The mounting bolts didn't break, he muttered. What do you mean? They were ripped out. Father Emmanuel bent slowly to pick up the cross. His hands shook slightly. Then he looked toward the boxes. Do not open them. I noticed sweat running down Daniel's face despite the freezing air. One of the older guards quietly requested reassignment from the room. Malik refused sharply, but fear had already spread among the men. And truthfully, I understood why. Because deep inside myself I felt it too. Not panic, not yet, but the unmistakable sense that something invisible had entered the palace alongside those boxes. I walked slowly back behind my desk while the guards placed the boxes several feet away beneath the windows. The scratching sound returned briefly, this time louder. Daniel stepped backward immediately. What if someone's inside? He whispered. No human could fit in there, Malik answered. The scratching stopped again. I looked toward Father Emmanuel. You believe this is evil? The priest answered carefully. I believe evil feeds on fear first. His words settled into the heavy silence surrounding us. Then suddenly one of the office lamps burst. Glass exploded across the floor. Daniel shouted again. Another guard cursed loudly. The remaining lights dimmed until the room glowed weakly beneath emergency power. Outside, thunder rolled across Ouagadougou. Rain finally began striking the palace windows. The storm had arrived. I sat down slowly and forced myself to remain calm. As president, fear spreads quickly if leadership collapses. Soldiers watch their commanders closely. One moment of weakness can infect an entire room. But inside my mind, memories returned from years earlier. Stories from villages in northern Burkina Faso. Stories elders told about cursed objects carried during times of war. Stories I dismissed as superstition. Now, sitting beside those black wooden boxes while cold air filled my office and broken glass covered the floor, I was no longer certain what to believe. Then Father Emmanuel noticed something else. My Bible, he whispered. The book resting near the edge of my desk had somehow opened by itself. Its pages moved gently despite the windows remaining closed. The priest stepped closer cautiously. His eyes widened immediately. What passage? I asked quietly. He swallowed hard before answering. John chapter 13. A strange tension moved through me. What verse? Father Emmanuel looked directly at me. One of you will betray me. The room became completely silent. And for the first time that night, a new fear entered my heart. Not fear of the strangers, not fear of the boxes, fear of betrayal already hiding beside me inside the palace walls. The moment Father Emmanuel read the verse aloud, something inside me changed. One of you will betray me. Those words did not feel accidental. They struck me with a force stronger than any threat spoken by armed enemies. Political attacks never frightened me as much as betrayal. A man can defend himself against soldiers approaching from the front. But betrayal walks beside you. It eats at your table. It smiles while waiting for the right moment to destroy you. I stared at the open Bible resting on my desk. The pages had stopped moving. The verse remained there before us under the weak office lights. Daniel looked visibly shaken. One of the older guards quietly stepped farther from the boxes as if distance itself could protect him. Outside, rain hammered harder against the palace windows while thunder rolled across the city. The storm seemed trapped directly above us. Father Emmanuel slowly closed the Bible with both hands. Mr. President, he said softly, you must be careful whom you trust tonight. His words immediately brought one name into my mind. Kofi Diarra. I hated myself for thinking it. Kofi had served beside me since the earliest days of military planning before I took power. He advised me during dangerous operations. He stood near me after assassination attempts. I trusted him more than almost anyone inside the presidential circle. But trust changes quickly when fear enters the room. And the verse from scripture had planted suspicion deep inside my thoughts. Malik noticed my expression. You're thinking about someone. I hesitated. Then I answered quietly. Kofi. Daniel looked surprised immediately. Sur, Edvisa Diarra. Father Emmanuel remained silent, though his eyes suggested concern. Malik crossed his arms. Why him? I walked slowly toward the rain-covered window before answering. Because he knew tonight's security schedule. That's not enough. He also approved changes to the northern checkpoint last week. Malik frowned slightly as he remembered. It was true. Kofi had personally ordered several security adjustments around the palace due to concerns about possible surveillance from outside groups. At the time, nothing seemed suspicious. Now everything felt different. The scratching sound inside one of the boxes returned again. Longer this time. slowly dragging against the wood from within. Daniel whispered a prayer immediately. I turned sharply toward the boxes. Open one, I ordered. No, Father Emmanuel answered instantly. I looked at him. We need answers. And some answers destroy those who seek them. His voice carried unusual urgency now. Malik stepped closer to me carefully. With respect, sir, the priest may be right. We should wait for the bomb unit. I felt anger rising beneath my exhaustion. Everyone in this room keeps speaking in riddles. Either these are weapons or they are not. Then suddenly all three boxes shook. Not violently, just once, but enough. Daniel stumbled backward in terror. One guard raised his rifle directly at the nearest box. Nobody breathed. The room became deathly still again. Rain continued pounding outside. My heartbeat sounded painfully loud inside my own ears. Finally, Malik lowered the guard's weapon carefully. Easy. What if something's inside them? The guard whispered. No one answered. Because none of us truly knew anymore. I looked back toward the Bible on the desk. The words remained trapped inside my mind. One of you will betray me. And suddenly small details about coffee returned one after another. His absence earlier that evening during security briefing, his nervous behavior during dinner 2 nights before, the way he avoided eye contact when discussing recent intelligence reports from northern Mali. At the time I ignored those things. Now suspicion fed upon every memory. Father Emmanuel seemed to sense my thoughts. Fear can cloud judgment, he warned quietly. But betrayal is real, I answered. Yes. And if someone inside this palace helped those strangers, then truth will reveal itself soon enough. Thunder exploded outside so loudly that several guards flinched. The lights dimmed again briefly. Then Malik's radio crackled sharply. He answered immediately. What is it? A frightened voice responded through static. Sir, there's movement in the lower hallway. What kind of movement? We don't know. Another burst of static interrupted the signal. Then came a sound through the radio that froze everyone in the room. Footsteps. Slow footsteps echoing through a corridor. But there was something wrong about them. They sounded uneven, dragging slightly, like someone walking while injured. The guard speaking through the radio began breathing heavily. Who's there? He shouted. No answer came. Only the footsteps. Closer now. Closer. Then the radio suddenly died. Complete silence followed. Daniel stared at Malik. That sounded like the southern corridor. It was. My office sat only 1 floor above that section of the palace. Malik immediately called for additional patrol units, but communication across several radios suddenly became unstable. Static interrupted almost every transmission. The storm outside worsened. Lightning flashed brightly through the windows for 1 brief second. And during that flash, I thought I saw movement reflected behind us in the office glass. A white shape. Standing near the doorway, I turned instantly. Nothing stood there, but Daniel had seen it too. His face turned pale. You saw someone? He nodded slowly. Malik searched the hallway outside immediately with 2 guards. Empty. No intruder. No footsteps. Nothing. When he returned, his expression had hardened. This situation is affecting everyone. Maybe he was right. Maybe exhaustion and fear had poisoned our minds. Yet deep inside myself, I no longer believed that explanation completely. Because the atmosphere inside the palace felt wrong in ways beyond imagination. Even the walls seemed heavy with pressure. Father Emmanuel approached me quietly. Have you prayed tonight? The question surprised me. I answered honestly, no. You should. I lead soldiers, Father, not monks. You are still a man. His words struck me harder than expected. Power often convinces leaders that strength alone can save them. During war, prayer becomes easy to forget. Survival teaches men to trust weapons, strategy, and force. But sitting inside that freezing office beside cursed boxes while scripture warned of betrayal, I began feeling how small human power truly is. Then another memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years earlier, my mother once told me something after a village funeral. She said, when evil enters quietly, pay attention to what God places before your eyes. At the time, I barely listened. Now those words returned with painful clarity. The strangers, the bell, the cross falling, the Bible opening. None of it felt random anymore. I turned back toward the desk slowly, and for the first time that night, I asked myself a terrifying question. What if God truly was warning me? And what if the betrayal had already begun inside the palace long before the strangers arrived? The storm reached its full strength over Ouagadougou, The atmosphere inside the presidential palace had become unbearable. Nobody wanted to say it aloud, but fear had already spread through the building. Experienced soldiers avoided walking alone through the corridors. Staff members whispered prayers beneath their breath. Even Malik, a man I had seen remain calm under gunfire, checked every shadow twice before turning his back. And still, the black wooden boxes remained inside my office. Silent. Waiting. The scratching sounds had stopped completely now, which somehow frightened me more than hearing them. I stood near the window watching rain strike the courtyard while Father Emmanuel sat quietly beside the broken cross. Daniel guarded the office door with trembling hands wrapped tightly around his rifle. Then Malik returned from another security sweep, carrying a small flashlight and a folded piece of paper. "We found something," he said. "What?" He unfolded the paper carefully on my desk. One of the guards had sketched a symbol carved beneath the bottom of the boxes. The moment I saw it, unease tightened inside my chest again. The symbol resembled an eye surrounded by twisted lines forming a circle. Parts of it looked ancient, almost burned into the wood instead of carved. Daniel stared at it nervously. "What does it mean?" Malik answered first. "I've seen it before." I looked toward him immediately. "Where?" "In intelligence reports from northern Mali several years ago." The room became still. Father Emmanuel slowly lifted his eyes. "What kind of reports?" Malik hesitated briefly before answering. "Political assassinations." A cold silence followed. He continued, speaking carefully. "There were rumors about a secret network operating across remote border regions. Warlords, smugglers, corrupt officials. Some witnesses claim certain killings were linked to rituals involving symbols like this one." Daniel swallowed hard. "You think these people are connected to that?" "I don't know." But Malik's face revealed enough. He did believe it. And so did I. The rain outside intensified again, while thunder shook the palace walls. Somewhere in the distance, a power transformer exploded loudly, causing the lights to dim for several seconds. Father Emmanuel stared at the symbol quietly. Evil organizations often hide behind symbols because symbols outlive men. I rubbed my tired eyes slowly. Could these strangers be part of some political group trying to frighten us? Malik shook his head. "No political operatives move like that." "What do you mean?" He stepped closer to the desk. When they stood outside the gate, none of the guards heard footsteps. Daniel nodded quickly. "I noticed that too. Maybe the storm drowned the sound." "No," Malik answered firmly. "Even when they turned and moved, it was almost silent." The memory returned clearly to me now. The men in white had indeed seemed strangely unnatural on the monitors. Their movements lacked ordinary human rhythm. Too smooth, too still. And their voices, even remembering those voices disturbed me. Not loud, not aggressive, but hollow somehow, as though echoing from a great distance. Then Daniel spoke softly. "Sir, there's something else." I looked toward him. When one of them looked at the camera earlier tonight, his voice weakened slightly. His eyes didn't look normal. Malik frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel hesitated, embarrassed. "I know how it sounds." "Say it." They looked pale, almost gray. Nobody mocked him, because deep down, every person in that office had noticed something unsettling about the strangers. Father Emmanuel rose slowly from his chair. In scripture, darkness often disguises itself in forms people are willing to trust. I glanced toward him. "You believe these men were not ordinary?" The priest answered carefully. "I believe human beings can surrender themselves completely to evil." His words stayed with me. Outside the office, sudden shouting erupted somewhere deeper in the hallway. Malik immediately drew his weapon. Daniel rushed toward the door. Several seconds later, 2 guards entered, escorting another soldier whose face had turned ghostly pale. "What happened?" Malik demanded. The soldier struggled to answer at first. "I was checking the west corridor, and I saw one of them." Every person inside the room became motionless. "The strangers?" I asked. "Yes." "Where?" "Near the lower stairwell." Malik stepped forward sharply. "Did you stop him?" The soldier shook his head rapidly. "He disappeared." "That's impossible." "I know what I saw." The guard's breathing grew heavier. He was standing completely still near the end of the corridor. I thought maybe one of our men had changed shifts. "And then?" He turned toward me. The soldier's voice trembled now. There was something wrong with his face. Daniel whispered another prayer. The soldier continued. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. Then the lights flickered. He swallowed hard, and when they came back, he was gone. Malik immediately ordered additional patrols through the palace. But even while giving commands, I could see uncertainty growing inside him. Not uncertainty about security, uncertainty about reality itself. Because trained soldiers do not vanish into thin air. The frightened guard suddenly looked toward the black boxes. That symbol, he whispered. You recognize it? I asked. He nodded slowly. My uncle served with peacekeeping forces near Gao years ago. His eyes remained fixed on the drawing. He once told me about men who used that mark before several political murders. Father Emmanuel spoke quietly. What kind of men? The soldier answered without hesitation. Men who believed fear gave them power over others. Lightning flashed outside again. For one brief moment, bright white light filled the office completely. And during that flash, every shadow in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. Daniel gasped softly. Then darkness returned to normal. I suddenly realized how exhausted everyone had become. Hours of tension, fear, and confusion were breaking down rational thought little by little. But another truth also became impossible to ignore. The strangers had achieved exactly what they wanted. Not violence. Not destruction. Fear. Pure fear spreading through the palace like poison. And fear changes people. It weakens loyalty. It feeds suspicion. It makes men betray one another to survive. My thoughts returned once more to Coffee Diarra. Where was he now? Why had he not answered repeated calls from security staff tonight? The timing felt wrong. Too wrong. Then Father Emmanuel looked directly at me. Mr. President, darkness often enters through those already wounded by desperation. His words struck me immediately. Desperation. Suddenly, I no longer saw Coffee merely as a possible traitor. I saw him as a man who might already be trapped inside something far larger than himself. And before dawn arrived, I would learn just how true that fear truly was. By the time the palace clocks passed 2 o'clock in the morning, exhaustion had begun crushing everyone inside the building. The storm still raged outside Ouagadougou. Rain struck the palace roof endlessly while thunder rolled across the sky like distant artillery fire. Security teams continued sweeping corridors, stairwells, and storage areas, yet no trace of the strangers could be found. Still, reports kept arriving. Guards hearing whispers in empty halls, footsteps echoing where nobody stood, lights flickering without explanation, and always the same feeling spreading through the palace, that something unseen was watching us. I remained inside my office beside the black boxes while Malik coordinated security operations through radio calls. Father Emmanuel prayed quietly near the broken cross. Daniel stood guard at the door, though fear had drained most of the confidence from his young face. At some point, fatigue finally overcame me. I sat down heavily in the chair behind my desk, intending only to close my eyes for a minute. But sleep took me immediately. And then the dream began. At first I saw only fog. Thick white fog stretching endlessly across an open field beneath a gray sky. There were no buildings, no soldiers, no sounds except distant wind moving softly through dry grass. I stood alone, or at least I believed I was alone. Then light appeared far ahead. A warm golden light unlike anything I had ever seen before. It did not resemble sunlight. It seemed alive somehow, gentle yet powerful enough to push back the fog surrounding it. And standing inside that light was a man dressed in white. I knew who he was instantly. Not because someone told me. Not because I saw paintings or symbols. I simply knew. Jesus Christ stood before me. Even now, speaking about it feels difficult. Words cannot fully explain the peace that surrounded him. The fear crushing me inside the palace disappeared completely in his presence. The fog stopped moving. The wind became still. And he looked directly at me. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with sorrow. As though he already knew every burden carried inside my heart. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask questions. But my voice would not come. Then he finally spoke first. Darkness often arrives wearing the face of a gift. His voice sounded calm and clear, yet it carried immense weight inside me. The moment he finished speaking, the fog behind him began shifting violently. Shapes moved inside it. Tall shadows without faces. Watching. Waiting. Fear returned suddenly. I looked toward the shadows, then back toward him. What do they want? I asked. My voice sounded weak. Jesus answered quietly. They seek power through fear. The shadows moved closer. I could feel hatred coming from them like cold air before a storm. Then I noticed something else in the dream. Black wooden boxes rested at my feet. The same boxes now sitting inside my office. One of them slowly began opening by itself. Darkness spilled out from inside like smoke. I stepped backward instinctively. Then Jesus looked at me again. Not every gift is meant to be opened. The ground beneath the boxes suddenly cracked. The shadows behind the fog moved faster now, circling like predators. And then another voice echoed across the field. A human voice. Crying. Begging for help. I turned toward the sound. For one brief moment I saw the face of a young woman hidden inside darkness, tears running down her cheeks. Then the dream shattered. I woke violently in my chair. My heart pounded painfully against my chest. The office lights glowed dimly around me. Rain still hammered outside. For several seconds I struggled to separate dream from reality. Then I noticed something strange immediately. Nobody else in the room was moving. Malik sat motionless near the communication table. Daniel remained frozen beside the door. Even Father Emmanuel appeared asleep in his chair. The entire room had become unnaturally still. I looked toward the clock on the wall. 3 o'clock exactly. But the second hand no longer moved. The clock had stopped. A deep chill passed through me. I stood slowly from my chair and rubbed my face, trying to steady my thoughts. Then I noticed Father Emmanuel watching me. He had not been asleep after all. "You saw something," he said quietly. I stared at him. "How did you know?" The priest looked toward the stopped clock. "Because the room changed." I walked toward the window slowly. The storm outside had weakened slightly now, though distant thunder still echoed across the city. "I had a dream," I admitted. Father Emmanuel rose carefully. "What kind of dream?" For several moments I hesitated. Then I told him everything. The fog, the light, Jesus standing before me, the warning about gifts, the shadows, and the crying woman hidden inside darkness. When I finished speaking, the priest remained silent for a long time. Finally, he asked softly, "Did you recognize the woman?" "No." But even as I answered, uncertainty touched me, because something about the face in the dream felt familiar. Not someone I knew personally, but someone connected to the events unfolding around us. Malik suddenly stirred awake nearby. "How long was I asleep?" "Only a few minutes," I answered. Yet his confusion suggested otherwise. Daniel also looked disoriented, as though he had awakened from deep sleep unexpectedly. Then Malik noticed the clock. "What happened to it?" "I don't know." He walked over and tapped the glass. Nothing changed. The hands remained frozen at exactly 3 o'clock. Father Emmanuel crossed himself slowly. In scripture, certain hours are associated with spiritual trial. Daniel looked nervous again. "Sir, maybe we should leave this room." Before anyone answered, a loud metallic sound echoed somewhere beneath the office floor. Everyone froze instantly. Another sound followed. A heavy dragging noise moving slowly through the lower hallway. Malik grabbed his weapon immediately. The guards outside shouted warnings through the corridor. Then came a scream. Short, terrified, and suddenly the palace no longer felt like a government building. It felt like a trap closing around all of us. Malik rushed toward the door with Daniel behind him. I followed closely despite Father Emmanuel urging caution. The lower corridor lights flickered violently as we descended the staircase. Several soldiers aimed rifles toward the far end of the hall where one guard had collapsed against the wall breathing heavily. "What happened?" Malik demanded. The guard pointed shakily toward the darkness ahead. "I saw someone carrying one of the boxes." We all looked immediately toward my office upstairs. The boxes should still have been there. Malik ordered 2 men to check instantly. Moments later, one returned pale-faced. "Sir, all 3 boxes are still inside the office." The injured guard stared in confusion. "No," he whispered, "I saw it." His terror looked genuine. Then Father Emmanuel arrived behind us quietly. He looked down the dark hallway before speaking words I never forgot. "Evil first attacks the mind before it attacks the body." I thought again about my dream. Darkness often arrives wearing the face of a gift. And deep inside myself I began realizing something terrible. The boxes were not merely objects. They were instruments of fear. And someone inside the palace wanted that fear to consume us before dawn arrived. After the scream in the lower hallway, fear spread openly through the palace. No one tried hiding it anymore. The soldiers moved in tighter groups now, rifles raised even while walking familiar corridors they had patrolled for years. Palace staff locked themselves inside offices. Several younger guards quietly requested permission to leave the compound before dawn. Malik refused every request. But the damage had already been done. The strangers had poisoned the atmosphere inside the presidential residence without firing a single bullet. When we returned to my office, the 3 black boxes still sat exactly where we had left them beneath the windows, yet somehow they appeared different now. Heavier, more threatening, as though the darkness surrounding them had grown stronger during the night. Father Emmanuel stood several feet away from them, holding the broken cross tightly against his chest. "We cannot leave those things here any longer," Malik said firmly. I nodded slowly. "Koli sakonate." Malik looked surprised. At this hour? Yes. Issa Konate was one of the most respected explosive specialists in Burkina Faso. During years of conflict, she had dismantled roadside bombs, hidden military traps, and improvised devices built by extremist groups across the Sahel. If the boxes contained explosives, she would know. Less than 40 minutes later, Issa arrived at the palace wearing a dark raincoat still wet from the storm outside. She entered my office cautiously and immediately stopped walking when she saw the boxes. "You weren't exaggerating," she muttered. "No," Malik answered quietly. Issa removed gloves from her bag and slowly approached the nearest box. Unlike the soldiers, she showed little visible fear. Her mind worked through logic first. But even she looked unsettled by the freezing air surrounding the wood. "That's strange," she whispered. "What?" I asked. "The temperature." She carefully placed a small electronic sensor against one side of the box. The reading changed wildly. "That makes no sense." Daniel watched nervously from near the door. "Can you open them?" Issa hesitated. "I can. But—" She looked directly at me. "I don't think we should do it carelessly." That answer disturbed me more than if she had simply admitted fear. Issa rarely doubted herself. She began scanning the boxes carefully using portable equipment from her kit. Everyone in the room remained silent while faint electronic sounds echoed through the office. Then her expression changed suddenly. "There's something inside." Malik stepped forward. "What kind of something?" "I'm not certain." "Explosive?" "Yes." She swallowed slowly, at least partially. The room became silent again. Issa adjusted the scanner several times. "There are triggering components hidden beneath the lower panels." "Enough to kill us?" Malik asked. "Enough to destroy this entire office." Daniel whispered a curse beneath his breath. I stared at the boxes. So the strangers truly had brought death into the palace. But why such elaborate fear and symbolism if simple assassination was the goal? Then Issa spoke again. "That's not the strange part." "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the internal scan image. "There are additional compartments inside the wood." "For chemicals?" "I don't think so." "Then what?" Issa looked uncertain for the first time since arriving. "I honestly don't know." Father Emmanuel suddenly spoke from behind us. "Perhaps someone else should see them." I turned toward him. "Who?" "There is an elderly woman in the Eastern District, Mama Aisha." Malik immediately frowned. "A spiritual healer?" Father Emmanuel nodded calmly. "I know how this sounds." "It sounds ridiculous," Malik answered. Normally I might have agreed with him, but nothing about that night remained normal anymore. The priest continued quietly. "She has helped villages during times of fear and violence for many years. Whether you believe in such things or not, she understands symbols older than modern politics." Issa looked back toward the boxes. "There are markings inside the scan I cannot identify." I made my decision quickly. "Bring her." Malik looked frustrated. "Mr. President, we have already crossed beyond ordinary explanations tonight." He reluctantly obeyed. The storm outside had weakened into cold rain by the time Mama Aisha arrived shortly before 4 in the morning. She was small and elderly, wrapped in dark fabric with silver bracelets around thin wrists. Her face carried deep lines carved by age and hardship, yet her eyes remained sharp and intensely aware. The moment she entered my office, she stopped walking. Her expression darkened immediately. "No," she whispered. Nobody spoke. Mama Aisha slowly approached the boxes while murmuring words too quiet for me to understand. She never touched them directly. Instead, she studied the carvings carefully from several angles. Then she suddenly looked at me. "Who brought these here?" "3 strangers," I answered. "They wore white?" A chill moved through me. "How did you know?" "Because men who carry darkness often disguise themselves as purity." Her answer sounded disturbingly similar to my dream. Issa carefully opened a lower panel using specialized tools while everyone watched in silence. The mechanism clicked softly. Then the lid lifted slightly. Cold air burst outward from inside the box. Daniel stepped backward instantly. Issa shined her flashlight carefully into the opening. At first, I saw only wires and metallic components attached beneath the structure. Then Mama Aisha inhaled sharply. "There." Issa angled the light deeper inside. And suddenly we all saw them. Symbols. Drawn beneath the lid in what looked like dried dark red paint. No. Not paint. Blood. Ancient markings covered the inside wood in circles and twisted patterns surrounding the same eye symbol found underneath the boxes. Father Emmanuel quietly whispered a prayer. Issa looked horrified. These symbols weren't necessary for explosives. Mama Aisha's face became grim. Because the bomb is only part of the purpose. I looked toward her carefully. Explain. The old woman stared at the symbols for several long seconds before answering. This is not merely a murder trap. The room remained silent. Then she spoke words I never forgot. This is a covenant. Daniel looked confused. A covenant with what? Mama Aisha's eyes stayed fixed upon the bloody carvings. With fear. Lightning flashed outside faintly. The old woman continued speaking slowly. Long ago, certain groups believed terror itself could bind powerful men spiritually. Gifts were used to create obligation. Acceptance became surrender. Father Emmanuel stepped closer. You believe the boxes were meant to corrupt him? Yes. Isa frowned. That sounds impossible. Mama Aisha turned toward her calmly. So did tonight. Nobody answered her, because every person in that office knew she was right. Nothing about this night followed ordinary reason anymore. The old woman then pointed toward the symbols again. These marks are old, older than modern governments. They were once used by men who believed power came through blood, fear, and sacrifice. Daniel's face drained of color. Sacrifice? Mama Aisha slowly looked toward me. The strangers expected these boxes to be opened willingly. My dream returned instantly inside my mind. Not every gift is meant to be opened. I felt cold sweat forming beneath my collar. If we had opened them, I asked quietly. The old woman hesitated. Then she answered softly. Death would have been the smallest consequence. Silence filled the office completely. Even Malik no longer argued against superstition, because logic itself had begun collapsing around us. Then suddenly someone knocked frantically at the office door. A guard rushed inside, breathing heavily. Sir, he said urgently, looking directly at me, Coffee Diarra has finally returned. The moment I heard his name, my stomach tightened. Because deep inside myself I already knew. The betrayal warned about in scripture was finally about to reveal itself. When the guard announced Coffee's return, the entire atmosphere inside my office shifted immediately. Until that moment, fear inside the palace had been aimed at the strangers, the boxes, and the invisible darkness surrounding us. But now the fear became personal. Because betrayal always hurts more when it wears the face of someone trusted. Where is he? I asked. In the south corridor, sir. Bring him here. The guard hesitated. He appears distressed. Bring him. The man hurried away. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Rain continued falling softly outside while thunder moved farther away beyond the city. Dawn still had not arrived, but the sky outside the windows had begun turning faintly gray. Father Emmanuel quietly closed the Bible on my desk. Mama Aisha stepped farther from the boxes as though preparing herself for something inevitable. Malik stood beside the office door with hardened eyes. And I remained motionless behind my desk, trying to control the anger building inside my chest. Because if Coffee truly betrayed me, then the warning in scripture had been real all along. A few moments later, footsteps approached the office. Fast, uneven. Then Coffee Diarra entered the room. The moment I saw his face, I knew something terrible had happened. His clothes were soaked from rain. Sweat covered his forehead despite the freezing temperature inside the office. His eyes looked exhausted and deeply afraid. But what struck me most was guilt. Pure guilt. Coffee stopped walking when he noticed the open box sitting beneath the window. His face instantly lost color. You opened it? He whispered. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. I stared directly at him. You know what's inside? Coffee slowly looked toward me, and in that moment I saw something I had never seen in him before. Brokenness. Malik stepped forward immediately. Where have you been? Coffee ignored the question. Instead, he kept staring at the symbols inside the box with horror filling his eyes. You should have destroyed them immediately, he said weakly. My anger finally surfaced. You knew they were coming. Coffee closed his eyes. No denial came. No defense. Only silence. Daniel raised his rifle instinctively. Father Emmanuel lowered his head sadly. I walked slowly around the desk until I stood directly in front of Coffee. Look at me. He obeyed reluctantly. For years I had trusted this man with military operations, intelligence reports, and decisions affecting the survival of Burkina Faso itself. We had survived violence together. We had buried soldiers together. And now I looked into the face of a man hiding something darker than politics. Tell me the truth, I said quietly. Coffee's lips trembled. Then suddenly he began crying. Not dramatic tears, not performance. The exhausted collapse of a man who could no longer carry fear alone. Malik looked stunned. I had never once seen Coffee cry. They took her, he whispered. I frowned. Who? My daughter. The words struck the room heavily. Amina, he continued, 3 days ago. I felt my anger pause briefly beneath confusion. What are you talking about? Coffee wiped his face with shaking hands. They kidnapped her. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from rain tapping softly against the windows. Coffee finally looked directly at me again. They sent me videos first, then messages. They told me if I cooperated, she would live. Malik's expression hardened immediately. You should have reported this. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Coffee's voice cracked completely. Because they sent me pieces of her clothing covered in blood. Daniel quietly cursed beneath his breath. The room suddenly felt even colder. I stared at Coffee silently while he struggled to breathe steadily. They contacted me through encrypted channels, he continued. At first I believed it was political blackmail, but then they started saying impossible things. What things? They knew details about the palace nobody outside should know. Father Emmanuel watched him carefully. Coffee swallowed hard, and they knew things about me. Fear returned visibly to his face. They spoke about my family history, about things I never told anyone. Mama Aisha quietly whispered something under her breath while listening. I crossed my arms slowly. So you helped them enter the palace? Coffee shook his head rapidly. No, I never let them inside. Then how did the boxes appear beyond the gates? I don't know. That answer angered Malik immediately. You expect us to believe that? I swear before God I never saw them enter. His terror looked genuine, too genuine to fake. Then Coffee looked toward the open box again. They told me not to let you open them willingly. The room became still. What do you mean willingly? I asked. They said acceptance mattered. My dream flashed inside my mind again. Not every gift is meant to be opened. Coffee continued, speaking through tears. They wanted you to receive the boxes personally before dawn. Why? They believed it would bind you. Daniel stared at him in confusion. Bind him to what? Coffee looked sick, answering the question. To them. Mama Aisha nodded slowly as though confirming fears she already carried. I stepped closer to Coffee again. Who are these people? I never saw their faces clearly. But you met them? Yes. Where? Coffee hesitated. Then he whispered the answer. An abandoned chapel outside the city. Father Emmanuel's eyes widened slightly. Saint Pierre, he said quietly. Coffee looked shocked. How did you know? The priest did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly looked toward me. That chapel has been abandoned for years. Coffee nodded weakly. That's where they brought me. What did they want besides the boxes? Coffee's face darkened again. They wanted access. To what? To you. Silence returned. Then Coffee finally revealed the full truth. They believed if you accepted the gifts before sunrise, they could control you through fear. I felt deep anger rising inside me again. Control me. They said powerful leaders become weak when they believe darkness follows them. Father Emmanuel quietly murmured, fear is bondage. Coffee nodded rapidly. They didn't care only about killing you. They wanted you broken first. The realization hit me hard. Everything that night suddenly made terrible sense. The symbols, the chapel bell, the psychological terror, the threats. The strangers had been building fear around me carefully, step by step, hoping eventually I would surrender spiritually before ever surrendering physically. Then Coffee collapsed into a chair and covered his face. I thought I could save her without hurting you. His voice sounded shattered now. I thought if I cooperated just enough, they would release Amina. No one spoke for several seconds. Because despite his betrayal, every man in that room understood the pain of family. Finally, I asked quietly, where is your daughter now? Coffee slowly lifted his head. At Saint-Pierre-Chapelle. The room froze. She's alive? They promised she would remain alive until dawn. Malik immediately turned toward me. It's a trap. Yes, I answered calmly. It could be suicide to go there. I looked toward the fading darkness outside the windows. The first pale signs of morning were beginning to touch the horizon. Then I remembered the final part of my dream. The crying young woman hidden inside the fog. Now I understood. It had been Amina. I turned back toward Coffee. What did they expect tonight? They believed by now you would have opened the boxes completely. And if I refused? Coffee's eyes filled with fear again. They said the debt would remain unpaid. The phrase chilled me deeply, because those words did not sound political. They sounded ritualistic, like something ancient. Then Father Emmanuel stepped beside me quietly. You already know what you must do. I looked toward him. Outside, dawn slowly approached. And somewhere beyond Ouagadougou, an abandoned chapel waited with armed men, hidden darkness, and a kidnapped girl whose life depended on what happened next. At exactly 6 minutes past 6 in the morning, I arrived at the abandoned St. Pierre Chapel on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The rain had finally stopped, but the world still looked wounded by the storm. Mud covered the broken road leading toward the old chapel. Dead branches lay scattered across the ground. Gray clouds drifted slowly above the city while the first weak light of dawn struggled through the horizon. Malik drove beside me in silence. Behind us followed 2 armored vehicles carrying trusted security officers. No sirens, no official convoy. Only quiet engines moving through wet streets while the city slowly awakened, unaware that another battle was unfolding before sunrise. Inside the vehicle, nobody spoke for several minutes. Coffee sat with his head lowered beside Daniel in the rear seat. His face looked empty now, as though guilt had drained every remaining piece of strength from him. I watched the road ahead while memories from the dream returned repeatedly inside my mind. Darkness often arrives wearing the face of a gift. Those words no longer felt symbolic. They felt literal. As we neared St. Pierre Chapel, Father Emmanuel quietly touched my arm. "Remember something," he said. "What?" "Fear loses power the moment a man refuses to kneel before it." I nodded slowly, but deep inside myself, I knew fear still existed within me. Not fear of death. That fear had faded long ago through war and conflict. What frightened me now was something else. The realization that evil could manipulate human weakness so easily. A father's love for his daughter, a leader's fear of betrayal, a nation's fear of instability. The strangers had understood all of it, and they used fear like a weapon sharper than bullets. The abandoned chapel finally appeared ahead through the morning fog. St. Pierre had once served missionaries decades earlier before conflict and poverty emptied the surrounding district. Now the building stood forgotten beside dead grass and cracked stone walls. Its roof sagged. Several windows were broken. A rusted cross leaned crooked above the entrance. Yet despite its decay, something about the place still felt alive. Or perhaps haunted. Malik signaled the convoy to stop 200 meters away. "We move carefully," he ordered the men. Soldiers exited the vehicles quietly with rifles prepared. Coffee stared toward the chapel with tears forming again in his eyes. "She's inside," he whispered. "How many men?" Malik asked. "I only ever saw one clearly." "That means there are more." "Probably." But something inside me believed this confrontation would not happen through open warfare. This was theater. Psychological warfare built around fear and symbolism. And the men behind it wanted something greater than bloodshed. I stepped from the vehicle into cold morning air. Mud soaked beneath my boots while fog drifted around the chapel ruins. Birds had not yet begun singing. Even nature seemed strangely silent there. Father Emmanuel quietly prayed beside me while Mama Aicha remained inside the vehicle, refusing to approach closer. Before leaving the palace, she had given me one final warning. Do not accept any offer made inside that place. At the time, her words sounded mysterious. Now they echoed heavily inside my thoughts. Malik moved beside me. "Sir, let us clear the building first." "No. That's reckless. They want me inside. That's exactly the problem." I looked toward the chapel entrance. They already believe fear controls us. Malik clenched his jaw tightly but did not argue further. I began walking toward the building. Daniel followed closely. Coffee stumbled behind us, looking physically ill with dread. The old chapel doors stood slightly open. As I crossed the entrance, cold air immediately wrapped around me. The inside smelled of dust, rainwater, and old wood left rotting for years. Weak morning light entered through broken stained glass windows, casting faded colors across cracked stone floors. And near the altar stood a man wearing a dark mask. Beside him knelt a young woman with bound hands. Amina. She looked exhausted and terrified, but alive. Coffee nearly collapsed when he saw her. "Amina." The masked man calmly raised one hand. "Stop there." His voice sounded deep and controlled. Not frantic. Not unstable. Amina cried quietly as Coffee moved forward before Malik restrained him. I stared at the masked figure. "You wanted me here," I said. "Yes. You threatened a child." "She was necessary." Anger burned inside me immediately. There is nothing honorable in using fear against innocent people. The masked man tilted his head slightly. Fear governs nations more effectively than honor. His answer revealed everything. This man believed terror itself was power, not ideology, not politics, fear. The chapel remained silent except for distant water dripping somewhere deeper inside the ruins. Then the masked man looked toward me carefully. "You did not open the gifts." "No." A pause followed. "You were supposed to." "You misunderstand something," I answered quietly. "I do not belong to you." The man laughed softly beneath the mask. You already belong to fear like every ruler before you. I stepped closer slowly. No. His posture shifted slightly. You think faith protects you? I know it warns me. The masked figure became silent. Then he asked quietly, who warned you? I thought about the dream, about the light inside the fog, about the words spoken by Jesus. And for the first time that entire night, complete calm entered my heart. God did. The chapel suddenly felt very still. Even the masked man seemed unsettled by my answer. You speak confidently for a man standing near death. I looked directly at him. Death stopped frightening me years ago. Amina quietly sobbed beside the altar. Coffee struggled desperately against Malik's grip. The masked man slowly reached into his coat. Several soldiers outside immediately aimed weapons through the chapel entrance. But instead of a gun, he removed a folded piece of paper stained dark red. A debt remains unpaid, he said. The word sent a chill through me. The same phrase Coffee mentioned earlier. What debt? You rejected the covenant. I rejected evil. The masked man's voice hardened slightly. You rejected power. I shook my head slowly. Power built on fear always destroys itself. Silence followed. Then unexpectedly, the masked man looked toward the broken cross hanging crooked above the altar. You still believe goodness defeats darkness? Yes. A strange sadness entered his posture then. Almost disappointment. As though part of him once hoped to believe that too. Then suddenly Amina cried out, behind you. Everything happened instantly. One armed man emerged from the shadows near the side wall holding a detonator device. Malik shouted. Soldiers stormed the entrance. Gunfire exploded inside the chapel. Daniel tackled Coffee to the floor while chaos erupted around us. The masked leader vanished sideways through a broken passage near the altar just as soldiers opened fire. The detonator man was shot before activating the device. Smoke filled part of the chapel. Amina screamed. Then silence crashed down again, almost as quickly as violence began. Malik immediately secured the room. Clear. Soldiers swept through the ruined corridors searching for the masked leader. But like the strangers at the palace, he disappeared without trace into the morning fog beyond the chapel ruins. Amina collapsed into her father's arms, crying uncontrollably. Coffee held her tightly while tears streamed down his face. I'm sorry, he kept repeating, I'm sorry. I stood motionless near the altar, breathing slowly while dawn light finally entered fully through the broken windows. Then Daniel approached me holding the blood-stained letter dropped by the masked man. Sir. I took it carefully. Only one sentence appeared inside. The gift was rejected, but the debt remains. I stared at the words silently, because deep inside myself, I knew this story had never been only about assassination. It was about corruption through fear. And somewhere beyond that ruined chapel, men still existed who believed darkness could rule nations through terror, manipulation, and despair. But as sunlight finally touched the broken cross above the altar, another truth became clear to me. Fear only rules the hearts that surrender to it. After everything that happened that night, I understood something no battlefield had ever taught me before. Power cannot save the human soul. Weapons cannot silence darkness forever. Money cannot protect a nation from corruption born inside fearful hearts. I have stood beside soldiers dying in dust and smoke. I have seen men betray their brothers for ambition. I have watched violence consume villages, families, and entire generations across Africa. Yet the greatest danger I witnessed on the night of October 17th was not the bomb hidden inside those black boxes. It was fear itself. The strangers believed fear could control people more effectively than chains. They believed terror could break loyalty, poison faith, and turn human beings against one another. And for a moment inside that palace, I saw how close they came to succeeding. Good men became suspicious. Friends doubted each other. A father betrayed trust because he feared losing his daughter. Darkness entered quietly, disguised as a gift. But I also learned something else that night. Evil becomes weaker the moment people refuse to surrender their hearts to it. When I stood inside St. Pierre Chapel at sunrise, I realized the true battle was never about politics or assassination alone. It was about whether fear would become greater than faith. And I chose faith, not blind faith, not the kind that ignores suffering or pretends evil does not exist. I mean the kind of faith that allows a man to continue standing even when darkness surrounds him completely. After that morning, the boxes were destroyed at an abandoned quarry east of the city under military supervision. Every fragment of wood, every symbol, every hidden device was burned and buried. Amina returned safely to her family. Coffee resigned from his position and disappeared from public life shortly afterward. I still pray for him because guilt can destroy a man long after danger ends. But the story did not truly end there. That same evening, after returning to the presidential palace, I entered my office alone for the first time since dawn. The broken cross had been repaired and placed back upon the wall. The room felt warmer again. Calmer. For the first time in many hours, silence no longer felt threatening. Then I noticed something resting on my desk. A red envelope. No guards saw who delivered it. No cameras captured anyone entering. Inside the envelope was only one sentence written in dark ink. The gift was rejected, but the debt remains. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I slowly looked toward the cross hanging above the wall. And in that moment, I understood something deeply important. The battle between light and darkness never fully ends in this world. Every generation faces it. Every nation faces it. Every human heart faces it. After all that happened, I now understand more clearly than ever that power and wealth alone can never save humanity. Only faith, compassion, kindness, and truth can protect us from becoming prisoners of hatred and fear. Our world already carries too much suffering, too much war, too much greed, too much anger. I pray for Burkina Faso. I pray for Africa. I pray for the people of the United States and for every nation across this earth. Turn away from cruelty. Turn away from greed and hatred. Choose mercy instead of revenge. Choose forgiveness instead of bitterness. Help one another while there is still time to do good. Even during humanity's darkest moments, never lose hope. Light still exists for those who keep faith alive inside their hearts. God is with us. God is with Burkina Faso, Africa, and the world. God is with Burkina Faso, Africa, and the world. God is with Burkina Faso, Africa, and the world. And if you also still believe goodness is stronger than fear, then leave behind a prayer for this world and continue walking beside those who choose hope over darkness.